So I work for UC Davis, and I'm like the supervising shelter vet at Yolo County Animal Services. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called California Animal Shelter Friends, which is a separate rescue entity that I run myself. And so I'm not the ED for Yolo County, thank God. Anyway, but the rest is all true. And then that's my baby camel, Sterling. He's clicker trained. We talked about that at dinner last night. He's awesome. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about maximizing life saving, because I think it's important. I think all of us want to save more lives, but I think sometimes there's confusion that the best way to do it is to just work harder and faster, and I think you can actually work a little smarter and still do a really good job. So one of the things, I know there's different kinds of groups that come to this conference, which is wonderful. You've got animal controls, humane societies, SPCAs, and then rescue groups. And so when we're looking at maximizing life saving, one of the big things is to make sure that you know as a person and as an entity what your strength is, and that you focus on your strength. Because as a life-saving community, there's a whole group of us. It's not just your entity in your community. And the more you can leverage each other, the better results you're gonna get. So you wanna really focus on the animals that you're the best one equipped to deal with. You wanna make sure that you're helping them efficiently so that you're kind of moving them through whatever your system is as quickly as you possibly can, and that you're working within the whole community so that you're all kind of doing your best work to get them all out as much as you can. So the big goal for most of us as shelters and rescues is to help the animals who need the help. And this is kind of one of the newer concepts. You know, it used to be back in the day that we were like, oh, bring them all in, we'll figure it out. Don't worry what our live release rate is. Don't worry what's happening to them, but bring them all in, and we'll somehow sort it out in the back. And now we're really trying to focus on animals who need us. And the ones who don't need us don't need to come to us and, you know, fill up our cages and get euthanized. And so that's one of the kind of best practices that is the most important one these days, is know who needs your help and help them, and don't mess with the ones who don't need you, because you're just gonna impact your system and possibly do them some harm. Once you get the animals in, you know, your next big goal is to get them out. And depending on your agency, if you have an option to get them back to an owner, that's a great option. If you have an option to get them back where they came from, that's also good. And then if you can't do either one of those, you need to find them a new home if they're an animal that's appropriate for. So that's kind of the big goal for us, is make sure we're taking in the right animals and then getting them out to an appropriate outcome. And one of the things that sometimes isn't as apparent is you want to do this quickly, right? You want to keep your length of stay short as possible to the appropriate outcome. And that's how you're going to really leverage how many animals you can help, is by keeping that flow moving. So when we look at the different kinds of entities, shelters versus rescues, and it can vary a little, but in general, like a shelter, a bricks and mortar, is going to be a little better equipped to help your fast track animals. These are the animals that kind of come in and can quickly move on through. And that's because you got public hours, you've got a lot of foot traffic, and people can just come in and easily pick up an easy animal. Usually shelters do a better job of that, and it's a little harder to help the tough cases in a shelter setting because there's usually so many animals involved. And rescues often are the ones who are better able to help your slow trackers, right? The ones who need more time or more help, a little bit more specialized finding of an appropriate home and counseling of the person and supporting them. So just in general, that's how we kind of see these agencies playing their best role, is by really focusing on what they can do the best given how they are set up. And so I said earlier that one of the big parts of this about maximizing life saving is this quickly element, this length of stay concept. And there's a few different reasons, and one reason is that it's better for the animals, right? Shelters, no matter how fancy they are and how nice they are and how much Kongs with peanut butter we shove at them, they're not a home, right? It's still a shelter. The real life room's still not a home. Kennel's not a home. And so trying to keep them in that facility as short a period of time as possible is gonna be in their best interest. And then you're gonna have fewer of them in the shelter, which is less stress, less infectious disease, all those good things. And so that's really important for the animals themselves. Even a foster home, you know, a foster home is closer to a real home, but it's not their real home. It's still just temporary. And so for most animals, the sooner they can get into their final landing spot, settle in, learn the routines, bond with people, that's their best outcome. And sooner is better, just because they need to get there. So it's not just better for the animals. The other equation here is the people side of it, right? And so keeping the animals moving through more quickly, so there's fewer at the facility at any point in time, is better for you as a shelter worker or a rescue worker, because it's less animals to take care of, right? It's less overwhelming, it's less stressful, and it's less costly to the facility. It's also better for the adopters, because like there's this thing, this decision fatigue, and it's real. Like the more animals we throw at an adopter, the harder it is for them to decide. You know, if you've got 10 black cats, it's hard for them to pick one of those 10. This is like an actual psychological phenomenon. So you actually want to give them an appropriate number of choices, but not an overwhelming number that they cannot even make a choice. And so it's kind of like an inventory management thing, that you want to have the right number of animals available and not a whole lot more, because you'll actually see fewer adoptions when you overwhelm people. So it's also better for them. And of course, your volunteers, right? You want to have animals for them to take care of, but not have your volunteers also be just overwhelmed by the sheer number that they can't even begin to contemplate caring for those animals. So in addition to the animals and the people, it matters overall for your facility, because the longer each animal stays, the fewer animals you can help. So you actually want to have fewer animals and have them moving through more quickly so that you can save more lives. So this is all about your length of stay. So LOS, I'll just abbreviate it a lot of time, but the shorter your length of stay is for each animal and your average length of stay is, the more animals you can save. And so there's kind of this magic math, which when you first look at it, it doesn't make sense. But the fewer animals you have for the fewer days, the more lives you can save, right? And you do it with less work, better welfare for the animals, and less stress for you and the animals. So I'm going to give us super simple examples, because sometimes unless you think through the math, it doesn't totally make sense. But like, let's say we've got this shelter number 1, and they have 100 cat cages. And so they've got 100 cats in those cages, and there's an average length of stay of 30 days. So they have 3,000 animal care days per month, because to get animal care days, we just multiply the days times the animals. And at the end of a month, they've saved 100 cats, which is great. They've saved 100 cats. They've also cleaned 100 cages every single day, right? That's not as great. Shelter 2 starts out with the same 100 cat cages, but they put portals in, and they give each cat 2 compartments. And they leave those portals open. They don't close those portals, right? So now you got 50 cats in these cages, and this shelter is doing more. They're following more of the best practices we're going to talk about to keep that length of stay short. So the length of stay in this shelter is 10 days. So on average, the cats stay about 10 days. So at the end of the month, they've provided 1,500 days of animal care. They've saved 150 lives, and they've only cleaned 50 cages a day. And their cats have been happier and healthier because they've had the double-sided cages. So overall, when you look at those 2 shelters, shelter number 1 has saved 100, shelter 2, 150. Shelter 1 has cleaned 100 cages a day, shelter 2 has cleaned 50. So overall, shelter 2 has saved more lives and done less work day to day just by really maintaining a quick length of stay. So they've saved more, less daily work, fewer cats at the shelter every day for fewer days. And that's really the secret. And if you really work hard to do this, you feel it, and it feels so much better. It feels so much better to have fewer animals leaving quicker, and you're still saving more. So if you're at a facility or at a rescue that's not embraced this concept and thinks you got to fill every cage, you got to close the portals, you got to shove them in there, and you're not looking at your length of stay, and you're not working to minimize it, you're kind of missing the boat. You're kind of missing something. You're missing a big part of this picture of how to be a successful facility. And so I was going to talk a little bit about best practices. And these are best practices like today versus 15 years ago when I started in this industry, or actually 17, 18, a while. It's been a while. But it's a different world. When I started in 2001, I was at Sac County Animal Care. Not Front Street, that's Sac City. I was at Sac County. Sac County's even worse than Sac City's ever been. Sac County used to take in 25,000, which if you're from Animal Foundation, I know you think that's nothing, but that's a lot of animals. 25,000 is a lot of animals. And we euthanized a bunch of animals every single day. And it was just a different world than today. And we, as an industry, have just grown by leaps and bounds. So the best practices I'm talking about are like as of this year, as of where we're at today. And it's going to keep getting better, hopefully. But if you can follow these best practices, it'll help you to minimize that length of stay. And if you can minimize your length of stay, it'll help you follow the best practices. So it's all kind of a little continuum here. So I'm going to kind of break down our best practices into intake side, in-care versus outcomes. And I'm just going to touch on each of these best practices like a couple of words or a sentence. And if it's something you are not familiar with, there are resources out there to research it. So if you're like, what does open adoptions mean? Then Google it, go to ASPCA Pro website, go to Maddie's, and learn about it. Because each of these concepts is kind of earth-shattering in and of itself. So on the intake side of things, and this is important because on the intake side, we used to just say, bring them in. You know, whenever you feel like it, we bring them in. We'll have night drop boxes, just shove them in there. Super convenient, no questions asked, right? And that's not where we're at today in most facilities, and it's not where we should be because it's not as good a system. So the first part of this is going to be managed admissions. Then knowing your capacity for care, knowing your adoption-driven capacity, and using your statistics. So on the first part of the intake side is this whole idea of managing admissions. And managing admissions doesn't mean that you're not open admissions. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily turning people away. It just means that you're trying to be smarter in how and when you help them so that you're doing a better job. So there's a couple of parts of this. The one part is intake diversion, right? And that's the part where you say, does that animal really need to come to the shelter, period? Does it even need to be here? So maybe not. If it's just a free-roaming neighborhood cat and it's happy and healthy and probably has 3 or 4 suckers feeding it, there's no need to snatch it off the streets, bring it to a shelter, shove it in a cage, euthanize it, or try and find it a new home. It's got a home. It's probably got 3 or 4 homes. Probably 3 or 4 people love that cat. So some of these animals don't even need to come in. If it's an owner wanting to surrender, you know, have they tried other options? Have they asked friends and family? Have they tried to network the animal themselves? Could they easily place it? Are they not realizing that shelters are a limited resource and they may have other resources themselves? They may have somebody who loves their cat or dog and would take it from them. And is there something you could do for an animal to keep it where it is? So is there a free-roaming cat that you could provide with medical care, let it go back? Is there an owned animal that just needs a little bit of help, spay, neuter, vaccines, whatever, that it could stay in its current home? And so for those animals, they might never need to come in. They might never need to become an at-risk animal at all. They can just stay where they are. And so that's awesome because technically you've saved a life without ever doing much more than educating and providing a little bit of care. The other part of the managing of admissions might be an intake deferral. And that says, do you need to come in today? So yes, you probably should come in, but does it have to happen today? If it's an owner, have they tried any other things yet? Or are they just coming to you as the first resource? Maybe they should try some things first. If it's an underage animal that somebody's found or a litter of kittens, can they hang on to it until it's a little bit older? You know, if it's a 1-pound kitten and it's not big enough for adoption, can they hang on to it for a few weeks and then bring it to you so that you don't have to find a foster home and go through all of that? If there is anything that you can do before it comes in so that when it does come in, it's ready to leave. And so this might be like, let's say there's an owner surrender cat, and you do a little pre-intake exam and counseling, and you look and it's got bad dental disease, and it needs to be altered, and you know you've got a 2-week waiting list for dentals. Instead of saying, oh yeah, bring it, we'll shove it in a cage for a few weeks, tell them, you know what, we're gonna put you on our list for a dental in 2 weeks. You're gonna come in, bring the cat in, we'll do the dental, and then he'll be ready for adoption. He won't have to sit here taking up a cage for 2 weeks for no reason. So try and match that up so that you're being smart with how you allow animals to come in. And so what you want to do when you're scheduling your intakes, like you've decided it does need to come in, there's not another option, you've got the timing about right, you want to make sure that you're scheduling to come in when you have the capacity to care for them, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. You want to make sure that you're matching their needs with your resource availability and that you're matching with outcome options. So if you're in that 2-week slump when school's restarting for the year, maybe defer some owner surrenders for a few weeks until you get through that and you know your adoptions are going to pick up again. You know your adoption-driven capacity, know where you're at, and schedule things as best you can to keep that length of stay in your shelter short so that you can help more animals. And then there's transfer programs. If you are working with a transfer partner, there's a lot you can do to schedule things, making sure that you're matching what you bring in with what they need help with. And I just wanted to mention a little, because I know there's a lot of rescue groups at this conference and in this coalition, basically. And one of the things that I've seen, and I don't know if you guys have any issues with that, but I know at times I've seen transfer programs that kind of go south because there's not great communication, or because one of the partners is playing a short-term game instead of a long-term game. And so like in economics, you learn about game theory. And there's like a short-term game where you try and win as much as possible without really caring what happens to the other person. And there's a long-term game where you want everyone to win so that you can keep that game going. And transfer and rescue partnerships, they're a long-term game if you want to be smart. So I've seen instances where a transfer is secured and the transfer partner sends a whole bunch of really unadoptable animals to the partner. And they accept them, but then they can't find them homes. And so, yes, they got rid of those animals, but they may never be able to do another transfer with that partner because they say, no, you kind of screwed us over. So you have to be smart. You have to work with them. What can you take? What can you place? And make sure that, you send them some highly adoptables along with your ones that are a little more difficult if that's what they can manage. So just be aware that that's a long-term game so that everyone can win, is that you really think that way. So, have you guys heard of capacity for care? Is that like a thing, like C for C? Just nod your head or shake, yeah, okay. So, the idea behind capacity for care is like if in the olden days, we'd be like, okay, I've got an empty cage, I can take in an animal. But it's not just about how many cages you have or how many foster homes. It's about like the big picture. How many people do you have to provide the care? How many surgery spots do you have to get the surgery done to get them up for adoption? How many dentals can you do? It's all of this, and it's not just that part, but it's also the outcome side. How many adopters do you have? So you can't just keep taking them in if you don't have the other pieces in place. So all of that is what defines your capacity for care. So you don't walk around your shelter counting cages to determine your capacity for care. You look overall and see how many animals can you provide care and get them out pretty quickly, and that is your capacity. And you can improve that over time, but you need to know it when you're trying to manage your intakes. So the other part of that is your adoption-driven capacity. Has anybody ever calculated their adoption-driven capacity for their facility? Okay, it's a data nerd thing, and I am a data nerd, so I do it all the time, and it's super fun. And what you do is you just look at how many animals you've adopted out. And you can look historically. So I might look at a facility for the past 3 years and see how many animals they adopted out each month over the past 3 years. And that would tell me kind of what their current adoption-driven capacity is. And I can break that down into how many animals per month can they adopt out given what they're currently doing. Not that they couldn't do better, not that they couldn't do more adoption events and make it even better in the future, but right now, what's your adoption-driven capacity? And I can look at it by month, by week. I can look at it by day of the week. So Monday is a horrible adoption day for you. Friday might be a great one. So it's something that you need to know. And what this can help you do is to kind of figure out how many animals you want to have available for adoption to maintain a decent length of stay. It's like, let's say that you look at all your data, and basically for September last year and the year before, you adopted out 2 cats per day, right? And if your goal is to have about a 10-day length of stay for your cats in adoption, you think that's reasonable, you'd want to have about 20 cats available at all points in time, because that's 2 cats per day for 10 days. That's your adoption-driven capacity. If you throw 100 cats in adoption, all you're going to do is extend your length of stay. You cannot maintain a 10-day length of stay if you only adopt out 2 cats per day and you have 100 cats in adoption. That math doesn't work. So you need to know this, and that helps you know how many cats should be in adoption. And you can also look at it by slow versus fast track. So this is just something that's super helpful for you to gauge who should be available, who should be coming in, who should be deferred or diverted. And it's an important thing, and if you're not aware of this, you're basically going to stockpile animals until every cage is full, and then you're going to kind of grind to a halt, and you're not going to be maximizing your life-saving capabilities because your length of stay is just going to get longer and longer, right? And you might feel good because you look around and you see a whole bunch of animals, but you're not saving as many as you could, okay? So it gets a little tricky if you haven't gotten that data, but most of you guys have it. If you have any kind of a shelter software, you can pull it out. It's not that hard. And it's interesting to look at it. And so while we're talking about data, which I love so much, there's all kinds of cool data that you can look at. You can look at your intakes by type, owner surrender versus stray, look for any trends. You can look by age group, you know, newborn kittens versus juvenile kittens, senior dogs versus young dogs. Kind of see what's coming into your facility. And that'll help you know kind of what resources do you need to increase or decrease based on what you're seeing. You can also look at your length of stay by intake type. And you can see, hey, our stray animals stay a lot shorter period of time than our owner surrender animals. And you can start to kind of manage your intakes using that information and say, you know what, we're going to limit our owner surrenders a little bit or schedule them a little bit better because we know they're probably going to stay longer. So this is just information that can really help you kind of figure out how best to manage your facility. So as far as the in-care part of this whole best practices equation, probably a lot of you guys are doing a lot of this stuff already, but I just wanted to kind of put it all in one place because I know there's little bits and pieces that all of us occasionally miss, or it's something that we're doing differently because we've always done it that way. Basically, I think in any shelter, policies and protocols are super important. Like confusion and drama is really just the enemy. Like shelters are already fairly emotional and dramatic by definition, so you don't want to have a lot of this drama over what are our policies and protocols. You should just know them, and you should know kind of what are our medical protocols, what are our cleaning protocols, how do we assess an animal for their outcome options, what kind of pathways to outcomes do we have, just all of this stuff. How do you make decisions? It shouldn't be a mad scramble every day to figure this out. You should just know how things work so that you can just deal with the animals and not deal with the policy and protocol part. As far as medical care best practices, I feel like we've all gotten a lot better on this. Kind of the whole vaccines on arrival, keeping up with all that, making sure the animals are getting their medical care has really come a long way, and making sure they get prepared for leaving. A lot of this you want to make sure that like you're just doing it with no delays and no bottlenecks. You know, if it takes a day or two to get intake care, that's not ideal. You know, if you have a 3 or 4 day wait to get a spay or neuter, all these little things just add up and they'll make your outcomes not as good, or they'll just increase your length of stay longer and longer anytime you have one of these. Your sanitation and cleaning protocols. I just threw this up here mostly because I'm still seeing places that are doing what we thought was the ideal thing about 10 years ago, which was full disinfection of every cage every day. Throw the cat in a box, spray the heck out of the cage, let the cat out, the cat's all freaked. And we now have kind of realized that if the same cat's staying in that cage, you can just spot clean it. If it looks grody, just clean it off. You know, dump the litter box or throw it away if it's cardboard. You know, shake out the towel, but actually most animals prefer their own scent. So giving them a brand new towel every day when their old towel was clean anyway, you know, doing the whole spraying thing when it's their own germs, they're not going to get sick from themselves. So it's actually a better practice to spot clean an occupied cage and only disinfect fully when the animal leaves and a new animal's coming in. And that actually saves you time. So it's just one of those things. It's amazing that it works for everybody. Holding periods can really impact your length of stay and your life-saving capacity. And you have some limitations or seeming limitations that they're dictated by the law, right? So in your state, there's going to be a certain holding period, or there's going to be a local ordinance that overrides that to say how long you have to hold an animal for a stray hold. And if you look at it and it seems unreasonable in this day and age, you know, if you've got a 5 business day hold or even a 5 day hold is still a little bit on the long side at this point in time, it's not insurmountable. You can actually work to get those changed. And you can also actually look at the language of your holding periods to determine if there's something you could be doing during the stray hold. So what's amazing is most holding period language just says that you cannot euthanize or destroy the animal during the hold unless it's irremediably suffering. But it doesn't say you can't spay or neuter it, right? And so like feral cats, that's actually why we can do TNR clinics. Nobody's requiring us to hold that trapped cat for 5 days because we're not euthanizing it. We're spaying and neutering it and putting it back in its home. And so a lot of facilities that are really kind of forward-thinking and, you know, trying to minimize that length of stay, maximize life-saving, they're either adjusting their hold periods or they're providing some care during the hold period. So feral cat, litter of kittens, go ahead and spay and neuter them. You're not euthanizing them. You may not transfer ownership if you want to be really careful. Don't transfer ownership during the hold period. But you could put them back where they came from, because that's not transferring ownership. That's just letting them go to their home. So especially for cats, this is a big game changer for a lot of facilities, is that if you can do the spay and neuter on a litter of kittens, some shelter facilities, they've even decided that they have historically not had a litter of kittens redeemed by an owner. And they feel that the liability of putting a litter of kittens up for adoption during the whole period is pretty minimal, because they're not euthanizing them, and historically they've never had a litter redeemed. So they will offer them for adoption during the whole period. I do it at my facility. Litter of kittens come in, they're 1.5 pounds or bigger, they're healthy, they get surgery the next day, they go up for adoption. Never had a litter of kittens redeemed at my facility. And if we did ever have one, I don't think that would game change for me. Probably most people with a litter of kittens would appreciate the help anyway. So just keep that in mind, that holding periods can be adjusted if they seem unreasonable, and there's things you can do during the hold. Doesn't mean you can't touch the animal, you can't do anything with it. And so one of the reasons that we've kind of looked at hold periods, back in the day when so many animals got euthanized, we were all pushing for a longer and longer hold so they wouldn't be euthanized. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just curious, what about the risk for communicable diseases that come with living cat? How does just putting them out to general population, how would that?
Honestly, the risk for animals to get a communicable, so if they come in and they appear healthy, their risk of becoming unhealthy goes up with each day you hold them, because you are a much higher risk place than wherever they came from. So if they came in and they were healthy, and you put them in a clean cage, and you use good protocols, and you put them up for adoption, there's much lower risk of them suddenly becoming a sick animal than each additional day you keep them in your facility and they're exposed to stress and disease in your facility. So it's kind of an odd thing that if they appear healthy, they're actually better at moving on out of your system. It's not that you will never have a kitten break with a URI a few days later, but honestly, you'll have many more get sick in your shelter, or they'll get exposed in your shelter, and whether you held them 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, however long you held them, then you put them up for adoption, they actually have a higher risk of getting sick at that point because they've been exposed and under stress for so many days. So it's kind of a think about where the risk is. And the higher risk is actually in the shelter versus where they came from and where they're going. So one of the things so we used to think keep them longer so they don't get euthanized and hope that the owner comes. But when we actually look at the data, most animals who get redeemed are redeemed on day 1 or 2. So when you go much beyond day 1, 2, or 3, your owner redemptions just plummet. And so holding all of them many more days beyond that day 1 or 2 or 3 actually doesn't benefit you overall or the animals. So a lot of facilities and a lot of areas have kind of pushed for a reasonable stray hold, about 72 hours in a lot of areas seems to be a sweet spot. And beyond that, try and get them out. They haven't been redeemed yet. Most responsible owners will be at your shelter within that period. Beyond that, try and get them to where they need to go. I've seen some places when they tried to change the hold, there was an uproar about euthanasia. And one workaround that I've seen that worked really well is a bifurcated hold, where you say, okay, we're gonna hold them 3 days before a positive outcome, like adoption, rescue, transfer, but we will hold them 5 days before we euthanize them. So if they're on this pathway for a positive outcome, they get to go out faster. And if they're heading towards a negative outcome, there's a little delay, so there's a little bit of extra time for someone who might want to come in and redeem them. So for some communities, that's felt like a better way to do that. But if you're in an area that has an extended hold period, just realize that you can potentially adjust that. As far as housing, I think there's been a lot of improvements in how we house our animals. This whole concept of the double-sided housing is super important for them because they don't like to be around their poop and pee, which is understandable. Giving them hiding spots, cats and dogs, having some kind of a hiding spot can be good. Having an elevated or a deep-sided bed can give them a lot of kind of choice and a lot of feeling of security. Clean food and water, we've all kind of moved towards this, and then enrichment items are always great. And so the old-fashioned, cat with tiny cage in his litter box, and he's sitting in his litter box is kind of what we're trying to move away from. And then either the double-sided or the bigger condo style where they can kind of stretch out a little bit, get away from their litter is definitely preferred as far as welfare and health. So the next big part of the in-care stuff is your population management. Like, so you've done the intake control part, you've provided them with appropriate care, and now you've got to manage your population. And this is really important because some facilities don't do a lot of active population management. They kind of just passively, they do their thing, but they kind of just wait and see what happens, and every once in a while catch an issue. But really, kind of this active, relentless population management can really help you maximize your life saving and keep that length of stay really short. And this means that you're assessing your animals and your operations every day. You're identifying and removing barriers so that animals can keep moving on through, and you're making sure that each animal is moving towards an appropriate outcome every day. Not every 10 days. You don't like check in every 30 days and see, oh, how's that black cat, right? Every single day, relentless. You're trying to see what's going on. And it involves planning and review. You know, how is your facility doing? What do you need to work on? Are there any issues that are coming up that you could address? And whether that's on the intake side or the in-care side or the outcome side, it's all part of population management to really manage those animals that are in your care. And one of the basics of this is this daily rounds. And that means that some human or a group of humans physically walks through the facility and puts eyes on every animal every day. And you just do a quickie assessment. And you're not like doing a full physical or a full behavior eval. You're just like, how are you doing? How are you doing? So you're looking at medical, you're looking at behavioral, you're making sure they were given the appropriate hold, checked for ID, any communications are in your system, any weird things that are coming up, is there a possible adopter, blah, blah, blah. You're checking on all this stuff. Is there a possible owner? You know, you're making sure that everything's being done for that animal every day to keep it moving through your facility so it's not just sitting there, because you want it moving towards their outcome. And that's really important, and it's interesting how few facilities do a really good job of daily rounds, because it's so important. I can't even imagine. Like, at the facility that I'm based out of, occasionally on the weekend, it doesn't happen on a Sunday, and I come in on Monday, and I'm just like, I'm so upset. Because, like, things just go to hell. I'm like, it's been one day without rounds, and things have gone to hell. You know, animals didn't get their notice of impound sent out, microchips didn't get traced, possible adopters didn't get followed up on, wrong hold periods were given, behavior evals were missed, like, and that's one day in a little facility. So every day, every animal, very important. And your goal is that you're making sure that the animals are moving through the system efficiently with no weird delays, right? Because that's what you're all about. Get them in, get them out. That's my motto. I said that last night at the party, because I am just a party animal. Get them in, get them out. That is my motto. So what prevents your efficient flow through? You talked about holds a little bit. You want to make sure that those are appropriate because they can become real barriers. There are some facilities in California. We had this thing called the Hayden Bill. And it was awesome at the time. Like, it seemed so wonderful. It was like a 5 business day hold, blah, blah, blah. It had all these caveats. But it basically extended the hold. It is no longer funded. It is no longer in effect. The current hold is 72 hours straight, no business days. And some facilities don't trust that or don't understand that the Hayden Bill's in sunset. It's not funded. It's this whole confusing thing. But those facilities that are still doing a 5 business day hold, you can just see it. You see it in their length of stay. Their owner redemption rate hasn't gone any higher. Their redemption rate's no better than mine, but their length of stay is longer, and their infectious disease is worse, and their animal welfare is worse. So make sure you've got those legal holds under control. You want to look within your own system for bottlenecks. You know, what are some things that are causing you issues? Are animals getting intake care? Are they getting evaluated? Are they getting moved down through the system to get out of there? And then also look, are there any barriers that you're putting up without realizing that it's a barrier? So there have been shelters that I've talked to where they're like, oh, okay, puppies and kittens must have 3 vaccines before they can leave us. I'm like, oh my God, no. You are the highest risk place possible for that baby. Get him the heck out of there. Oh, I just said heck, look at me. I usually say hell. Anyway, so get them out. Holding them for more and more vaccines while they're at their most vulnerable in the worst possible environment is not beneficial. And it's well meant, but it's not justified. It's not supported by the evidence. The same thing, gosh, you just asked about this. So extended holds to see if they break with a disease. If they appear healthy when they came in, you know, wherever they came from, there's much less population density, stress, handling, infectious disease than where they're at now. So if they look healthy, try and get them out. I am not saying that never in 10 years will you have something break with something, But you'll have it break with something whether you hold it 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, because you're exposing it every day that it's with you too. If it's young, especially, if it's not fully vaccinated. So you just got to balance this stuff. Make sure that, you're not putting up any barriers. And so watch for your bottlenecks. You've got this certain group of animals that come in every day. And then if you have a smaller group getting assessed, because some don't get assessed each day, and you have a smaller group getting processed for adoption and a smaller group getting spay-neuter, then you end up with this very small group actually moving into adoption every day. And so it's a bottleneck. It's a bottleneck to animals moving through your system. So this is another big part of really keeping them moving through. And this is this pathway planning. I don't wait for an animal to declare itself. I don't wait for day 4, the due out date, to look at the cat and say, hey, are you friendly or not? Are you feral? I am assessing the animals from the moment they arrive. If I have history, that's even better. But from the moment they arrive, I'm trying to figure out what pathway are they likely to be going down so I can be preparing them for that. So animals with signs of ownership might be animals that might be on a redemption pathway, maybe not. Animals that are unlikely to be redeemed are probably going on a different pathway. So the sooner I can kind of look at them and decide what pathway are you likely on, the sooner I can get them on that pathway and they can move on down the road. So for animals where redemption's a possibility, you want to do everything you can to help them get redeemed. Usually happens on day 1 or 2, especially for dogs, because cats don't get redeemed so much, but some of them do. So knowing that the dogs get redeemed on day 1 or 2, or the cats, you want to do whatever you can to help that. And so things like posting animals as they come in. I have worked with shelters where their officers are awesome, and as they pick an animal up, they take a picture and they put it on Facebook and say, hey, I just picked up this kid. He was on Main Street. Is this your dog? And then a few minutes later, you'll see a post saying, oh, I took him home. He's home now. He's safe. So that early, some of those animals never even go to the shelter. If they do arrive at the shelter, post them on Facebook. Get onto that instant Twitter feed if you've got Chameleon. Pet Point could probably do it too. But let people know that you've got these animals and try and get them to their homes. It's amazing how many times a friend or family member will be like, oh, I know that animal. Facebook has all their great lost and found pages. There have been an amazing number of animals reunited from those Facebook lost and found pages. So your shelter website have the live updates of animals coming in to help people find their animals. Make sure your shelter is accessible. Make sure your hours are amenable to normal humans who work at a job. There are some shelters that are open like 1 to 5, and I'm like, well, most people are at work from 1 to 5. So just make sure that you're kind of doing everything you can to help people find those animals, because the sooner they leave, the better. That frees a cage for an animal who may not have an owner. And then making it easy to redeem is really important. Pathway 2, so like you've got that redemption pathway, that's great, get those guys out. Pathway 2 is for animals who redemption's unlikely or it hasn't happened, right? So these guys are heading towards adoption, rescue, transfer maybe, if they're nice and relatively healthy. So these guys, you too want to make sure that they're kind of being assessed. What information do you have about them? Any history? Anything they do while they're in your care can help you know where they're going. You don't have to wait until day 3 or 4 and do this formal behavior eval with the 10 tests to know kind of what pathway they're probably on. And you don't have to wait to start addressing issues. If they're a little fearful on day 1, try and help them. Do something to work with them. Sit quietly, throw treats in there, do some positive reinforcement, do some behavior modification. If they're really fearful, get them on a drug that'll help them with their anxiety so that they're not as awful in your shelter and that the facility isn't as awful for them. Trazodone's a great drug. I've used it quite a bit with our anxious animals. I don't usually use it with an animal on a stray hold because I feel a little weird about using a behavior mod drug on a potentially owned animal. But on an owner surrender or after the stray hold, for sure. If you see a little bit of food guarding on day 1, don't wait till day 4 and then give them a pig's ear and see if they attack your assessa hand, right? Start doing a food modification behavior, food aggression protocol day 1. Walk by, toss some treats in there. Walk by, drop a treat in their food bowl. Try and work on those things sooner rather than later so that maybe they aren't even issues by the time you get to your formal assessment if you do one. For these guys where adoption is likely, where you're thinking, okay, this is probably going to be an adoption candidate, If you can assess whether they're going to be probably a fast track candidate or a slow track candidate, it can help you decide what to do for them. So you've got the Siamese kitten, that's your fast tracker, right? That guy gets priority on your surgery schedule. You got the sweet 8-year-old black domestic short-haired cat. God bless that cat. He also has a good chance of finding a home at some point, but he's not going to fly off the shelves the way the little Siamese kitten is. So if you're backed up in surgery, potentially the black domestic short-haired cat is going to go a little lower on your list of priorities because he's a little bit of a slow tracker. It's not that you're not going to get him out. Just realize that he's already kind of declared himself as a slow tracker potentially. And you need to know what's a fast versus a slow for your facility. And you want to balance those. You know, most facilities, I like to have mostly fast trackers flying off the shelves, like 75% fast trackers, and then about 25% slow trackers. I don't want to overwhelm the adopters, but I want them to have an option. Do you want to help an older cat? You know, do you want a cat who's got a little bit of a medical problem? But I don't want them to feel so overwhelmed they can't make a choice to do that. But I want to keep those cages turning over with my fast trackers while I give the slow trackers a chance. So just be aware of that, and don't wait if you're going to put a slow tracker up. You know, that black domestic short hair, that'd be a great cat to promote on your Facebook page alongside the Siamese kitten to bring the people in. But don't wait until day 30 and say, oh yeah, he's still here. You know, get him up on the Facebook page, do a black cat special, whatever it takes. For the guys that you think probably you're going to need some rescue, work on that soon. I do that day one. If I see an animal and I walk through and I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to need medical rescue, I'll tell my rescue coordinator, I'll say, hey, just so you know, if this dog is not redeemed, he's going to be a rescue request. So feel free to start feeling out your options because I don't think we have another option for him. And so my rescue coordinator will send out a little plea and say, hey, still in a stray hold, but if he's not redeemed by Thursday, he's going to need rescue. And then the rescues can start coordinating. There's no reason to wait. And if he gets redeemed, great. You know, then the rescues are thankful too. They're like, good, he didn't need us. But at least we didn't wait and wait and wait to even start the process. So then this is your whole other group that we have new options for now that are amazing, because back in the day, these feral and fearful cats were basically euthanized on their due out date, right? At most facilities. Like I remember exactly what this felt like. So in this day and age, hopefully most shelters are either not taking these guys in and just funneling them through a TNR program, or if you end up stuck with them, get them altered and put them back. If they can't go back because something happened or the business is like, I don't want that cat back, and you can't convince them, then worst case, you can try and find a barn cat placement. So we do a lot of barn cat placements for the ones who can't go back to their homes. People need barn cats. They serve a vital purpose. So it's wonderful to have that option. And for those guys, you know, your feral cats, you know, get them processed. Again, the law says don't euthanize them during the hold. It does not say don't spay and neuter them, and it does not say don't put them back where they came from. So if that is not something that is not allowed where you live, you can actually expedite those kids. Again, at my facility, day one, I walk through, you're feral, great, you're on the surgery schedule for tomorrow, and then a volunteer takes you back to your home, or the RP who brought you in comes and picks you up and takes you back. Because as they arrive, we tell them, oh yeah, that cat is probably not an adoption candidate, and if he's not, we're gonna alter him, ear tip him, and he's coming back. Do you mind picking him up? An amazing number of ours will actually come and pick the animal up because they didn't want it killed. They just thought it was homeless and were worried it was breeding or whatever. So we've actually served a purpose, and most people now are very happy when they realize that we used to euthanize those animals and now we don't. And so this is our kind of last category pathway. And these are animals that there's no other option. They are very sick. They are not treatable. They are suffering, or they have a behavioral concern that is so severe that it is not safe to try and rehome them. You should ideally be able to assess these. As a vet, I know which ones these are, at least on the medical end, usually on the behavioral end too, because they're trying to kill me. And as behavioral people, you should know who your basically unhelpable ones are. And if things are not improving over the stray hold, the kindest thing for these ones that do not have another option is to make the appropriate choice when the time is right. And if the animal is in chronic kidney failure and it is dying and vomiting and wasting away and miserable, it is absolutely not wrong to put that animal to sleep. That's what most owners would do, And at this moment in time, you are the owner at the end of the stray hold. So just be aware that it's also important to make the right decision, even when it's a humane euthanasia, in a timely manner. And your statistics should not drive this kind of decision making. This should be about what's right for the animal. So that's really important. So again, this is all about getting them to their outcome, right? The whole goal is to keep them moving through the system, get them out to the appropriate outcome. And as we've said a few times, you want to be assessing them from the moment you lay eyes on them. Do whatever you can for them during any hold period you have, so that as soon as possible, they leave your facility. And so a big part of this is this efficient and effective decision making. And you or somebody at your facility who is kind of in charge of this just has to really know. You have to have this global perspective. What are our policies and protocols? What are our options for outcomes? What kind of care can we provide? What are our resources? What are our constraints? And who can we reach out to for help if we need help? And this will help you to kind of keep these animals moving through really effectively. I'm not going to talk a ton about this, but it is another best practice that I think a lot of places are getting better and better about, and that's just your behavior training and enrichment. And this is that same thing about assessing the animals, providing them with the needed, care, training, quiet time, behavior mod, all of this stuff. The earlier you can see that they need it and provide it, the quicker they'll leave your facility to an appropriate outcome. And again, it doesn't have to wait. You can do this from day one. You can make things better for these guys from day one. And this is just kind of, this was from a previous lecture about just kind of this holistic approach to it. We used to kind of have the animals sit for a few days and then do this formal eval, and now it's this whole process. Get their history, see how they do in the shelter, provide some enrichment, provide some training, assess them, and then try and get them into an appropriate home. So it's just part of best practices that I didn't want to leave out because it's kind of near and dear to my heart. And again, statistics, looking at your in-care, you're looking at length of stay, you're looking for risk factors for an extended length of stay, you're looking at your daily animal inventory, and who's on that inventory. What are the current lengths of stay for the animals that are in your facility? Are most of them in that fast track category? That's great. Have they been there 0 to 10 days? Fabulous. Do you have a whole bunch who've been there a month or longer, 2 months or longer, 3 months or longer? You need to get on that. You need to get them moving through your system, because that's not in their best interest or your best interest. And then the final part of the whole equation is this whole outcome practices. And there are some really good things that we have changed in our industry. I think we used to have this antagonistic relationship with owners, and we've gotten a lot better about wanting animals to go home if it's at all appropriate. Unless it's abusive, really try and get them home. Try and help them go home, stay in their homes, provide care if they need it to really help those animals. Because otherwise you just have to rehome them, and that person's going to go get another animal anyway. So it's not like you've saved an animal from being in that home. You've just put a different animal in that home and needed to find a new home for the animal that was already in a home. So get them home if you can. That's super important. Then this whole robust rescue transfer program thing. It's vital in shelters today that you kind of have these relationships with rescue transfer partners and have a good foster program set up to provide the care the animals need without them just sitting kind of stockpiled in a facility, in a shelter facility. And so if you're over capacity, if you can see the animal's gonna have an extended length of stay, look for other options to get them out of your facility. And as far as the foster program best practices, just make sure you're staying on top of it. I see some shelters that send a ton of animals to foster and kind of lose track of them. And they don't get their booster care, and they don't get rechecked to see if they're ready for adoption. And that really just makes your foster program get out of control, and then they still have to come back someday. The other big part of fostering, especially for kittens, is this whole 1.5 pounds and robustly healthy. If you alter and put up for adoption your kittens at this weight and health, you have fewer who need to go to foster, and they spend less time in foster. So it actually works great. There's no reason not to do this on the medical end. The morbidity mortality is no higher at 1.5 than 2 or 2.5 or 3. So just keep them moving through. Keep them moving through foster, or keep them out of foster if they're already 1.5 pounds. Adoption-driven capacity, we talked about this a little bit earlier. And one of your goals is to just keep on top of it, know where you're at and maximize it. Promotions, whatever you need to do if there's some subtle timing things you can do to maximize your outcomes with your adoption-driven capacity. If you know that Friday, Saturday are your big adoption days, try and get your fosters coming in for spay, neuter, and coming up for adoption on Wednesday, Thursday, so that they're ready for those big days. And just kind of match that up to decrease that length of stay. You know, if your kittens come back on Monday and your big adoption day is Saturday, you've potentially increased your length of stay for every kitten by 4 days just having them sit there waiting for the right day of the week. So it's just a subtle thing, but it can actually decrease your length of stay significantly. And then the kittens are less stressed, less disease exposure. So it's all good in that way. This marketing and promotions, this has just got to be like relentless, ongoing. You've got to always be promoting so that people think of you first when they're ready to adopt, so those animals get out of there. Open adoptions, I think a lot of us have changed our mindset with adoptions. You know, we used to like, prove to me you're the best owner in the world so you can have this kitten. Meanwhile, animals are getting euthanized in the back, right? So now we're like, oh, here's a kitten, good luck, right? So just be aware, open adoptions. I mean, seriously, right? If you don't give it to them, Craigslist is out there. So they're gonna get a kitten. Might as well get a spayed, neutered, microchip, vaccinated. So if you're not into this concept yet, there's a ton of information on it that's super good. And it's a really good concept. And it was a game changer for a lot of facilities, including my own. Cats, we've talked a bit about cats. They're free roaming. They're similar to squirrels. Do they really need to come in? Maybe not. If you're not in the Million Cat Challenge or are not aware of it, check it out. They've got some great resources and information and amazing webinars lately. I can't even keep on top of them all, but they've got some really good stuff. And data. Data is your friend. Don't be afraid of it. Get in bed with it, cuddle it a little bit. Data can help you do better. You don't know what you're doing wrong unless you know what you're currently doing. So look at your data. Look at all these different things. Risk factors for euthanasia, risk factors for extended length of stay. See what you can do to change these things. And your goal is to maximize life saving. So get in there. So your first steps is kind of thinking about the things we talked about today. If there's anything you feel like you're not doing or you're doing a little bit differently, kind of look for what you can do that's like an easy win. What can you change that'll like immediately decrease your length of stay or immediately increase your life-saving capacity? So start with the easy wins because that'll get you going. And then once you've done your easy wins, you do this crazy kind of impact versus effort analysis and you decide what's next. So you've got your easy wins, then what's the next big thing you could do, whether it's easy or hard? And then if there's things that really aren't of any value, don't even bother. So I like this little graphic where it's like, these are your easy wins, the oh yeahs, the ones that are not even worth it are the nopes, and then the other ones are the ones that you're gonna work on at some point. And just for a real world example, because I have it, so this is the facility that I'm based out of, and this is just their information showing before and after we implemented these concepts, especially the population management, the managed intake, actually all of these, almost everything I talked about, we didn't do before and we do it now. So again, we've gone with life-saving has gone up from 74% to 96% for dogs, 33% to 89% for cats. Length of stay, oh, that's not 112, that was 11.2, it left out the decimal. That would be ridiculous. Length of stay for dogs was 11 days on average, now it's 7. Length of stay for cats was 9 days on average, now it's 4. Which means a ton fewer animals at the facility. Euthanasia numbers dropped drastically for both species, and the number of lives saved went up even as we managed our admissions. And this is just a little public shelter. Takes in about 4,500 animals a year, including various other species. But just implementing these policies, and with no additional funding and no increases in staff and no new facility, because it's a horrible, crappy old facility, they've made these amazing changes. Like this is a shelter that I'm proud of how we've done, even though I know it's got its challenges. And it was mostly just doing these things, you know, managing admissions, managing the population, and changing some mindsets. So again, my motto, get them in, get them out, because that's how you can save more lives and save yourself some stress. And then this is my email address if you guys have any questions that don't get answered in this presentation or by me today. Alrighty, thank you guys.